President Biden under a cloud of crises, growing disapproval ratings and rising costs on nearly everything we buy. Now getting panned after he tried to defend his tumultuous first year in office, spinning it all this way during one of his rare solo news conferences from the White House.
I didn't overpromise, but I have probably outperformed what anybody thought would happen. The fact of the matter is that we're in a situation where we have made enormous progress.
I'm Harris Faulkner. You're watching Outnumbered. I'm joined by my co-hosts Emily Compagno and Kayleigh McEnany, anchor of Fox News at Night. Shannon Bream is here. And in the center seat today, former White House speechwriter, Washington Post columnist, and Fox News contributor Mark Thiessen. Welcome, Mark. Critics calling the president's news conference a total disaster, and the White House even forced to clarify some of his comments. Not once, not twice. Now he's doing it himself. The New York Post described his Q&A as, he said what? Writing that if the press conference was supposed to inspire confidence, it failed horribly. Although he tried to highlight his, quote, enormous progress in the first year of his presidency, he clearly ignored some of the nation's larger problems, such as crime. Although, to be fair, the reporters didn't even ask about it. Like there's not even a crime crisis going on. Mentioned 0 times by him or them, raising questions that the president seems to be detached from the realities of the American people and what they really think, given his dismal polling about him. And here's how he reacted to all of it.
How do you plan to win back moderates and independents who cast a ballot for you in 2020, but polls indicate aren't happy with the way you're doing your job now?
I don't believe the polls.
Now that's interesting, Mark, because, and this isn't a fact check here, it's just an observation. While he says he doesn't believe them, how come he knew all the numbers at one point? He's like, well, this one says I'm 33. He knew like what every poll said.
And there's a lot of them, and they all say the same thing. I mean, this is not like an outlier here or there. He started out his presidency with 56% approval and 20 points above water on approval versus disapproval. He is today at about 41% of the Real Clear Politics average, 10 points underwater. So that's gone from 20 points above water to 10 points underwater in just a year. It's stunning. And if this is outperforming expectations, I would hate to see what underperforming expectations looks like. It reminds me of that. There was a USA Today poll where nearly half the country said that Biden has done a worse job than they expected. And I thought to myself, well, the rest of them think, no, that's pretty much what I expected. It's as bad as I thought it would be.
Wow. Kayleigh, you know, our former President Trump used the phrase promises kept. And this president yesterday was asked specifically about keeping promises. He went further. With hyperbole, perhaps, he over-provided, over-performed. You know, he didn't over-promise, which was what the question was. What did you make of his answer?
I thought that was the most delusional press conference I have ever seen. He said he overperformed, but the American people give him a 33% rating in Quinnipiac. He begins by touting the economy, for which the American people give him approval rating of anywhere between 36 and 40%. He said he did not make a mistake in Afghanistan, but the American people say, nope, 31% approval, President Biden. It was delusional. And Harris, it was also the first time we had seen the president of the United States, or really Biden ever, in a 2-hour solo format. The debates from the campaign don't count. You had Trump there, you had a moderator. First time we see him for 2 hours in this solo format. And I left that press conference genuinely scared for the future of our country. This is someone who is deeply delusional, someone who clearly does not know how to lead. He does not have a basic grasp on the facts. He continued to peddle mistruth after mistruth, emboldening Putin, emboldening Xi and China. And this is only 1 year. We've only had 1 year of President Biden. And look at the crises and the fires across the country that he entirely ignores. We have 3 more years left of this guy. I left very disturbed and even more disturbed by the reporters. So I can tell you, if President Trump said half of what Biden had said yesterday, reporters would have been screaming. They would have had follow-ups. They would have spoken over President Trump as he was speaking. I'm sorry, Mr. President, that's not true. They didn't do that yesterday. So it's a toxic formula when you have a delusional president and a press corps that is just uninterested in basic follow-ups.
You know, it's interesting, Shannon. I mean, you and I have both been in that small press briefing room, and it can get really small when tough questions are asked. And I did feel that reporters leaned in a bit yesterday, but not to talk about the crime crisis, only to mention the border twice. I mean, there were just things that got missed. And Jen Psaki today on America's Newsroom, the White House press secretary, told Bill and Dana that, oh, they could ask whatever they wanted. It wasn't her problem that they didn't ask about the crime. I mean, I wonder, just from another reporter's perspective, how you see this.
Well, first of all, I think give credit where credit is due, that he did almost 2 hours of this.
Yeah,
and you'll
stamina.
note when he was
Amazing.
trying, he was getting a little, right, I mean, a little combative at the end and was kind of joking to the reporters, where, how long do you expect me to do this? Another hour or two? Well, don't open that door, because everybody yelled yes in unison. They wanted to keep asking more questions, which I thought was fun. He had a little chuckle there and then said, okay, I'll give you 20 more minutes. But yeah, it's really up to the reporters. There's a host of issues and a range of issues that we want to cover when we go in that room. You're hoping your question doesn't get asked, but you have 2, 3, 4 topics you want to try to get to. And because he hasn't made himself more available in this way, sure, there are topics that you didn't get to, important ones like crime and everything else. One thing I thought was very interesting from him yesterday is that when he was critiqued on why people aren't getting on board with him, it was sort of, well, it's the messaging. I need to get back out there. He said, I want to get out there and be with people and sell this myself. But what worked for him in the campaign was not being out there, because the few things that he did get out and do, we saw that there weren't massive great turnouts. It actually worked for him staying home. So I'm not sure that that messaging is going to help him on any of the things he's trying to get done.
You can't do both. You can't stay in your basement in Delaware and not stay in your basement in Delaware. Like, they're going to have to figure something out. All right, I want to get to Afghanistan with you, Emily. The president defended his withdrawal of the U.S. troops in Afghanistan last August. Watch how he did it.
Raise your hand if you think anyone was going to be able to unify Afghanistan under one single government. It's been the graveyard of empires for a solid reason. It is not susceptible to unity. There is no way to get out of Afghanistan after 20 years easily. Not possible, no matter when you did it. And I make no apologies for what I did.
Emily, you know, he previously said, before holding office as president, that we had to get out without making those types of mistakes. Paraphrasing him now, he actually went into much more detail about it. What did you make of his answer yesterday?
I thought it was a weak, typical deflection where, to echo my colleagues here, he has a delusional, not only sense of the facts, but also a delusional sense of himself. And I want to wrap that up with the polls and that point that we covered earlier, which is just that to say, although he says that he ignores them, he really shouldn't, because they reflect 2 important trends, which is what Americans care about and how they feel about this president. And it was clear yesterday that what the reporters think Americans care about is totally disconnected from what actual Americans do. So them harping on Ukraine, harping on certain things. No, we care about crime. Those 13 service members who lost their lives in that botched Afghan exit, those families certainly do care about a real, transparent, honest answer from the president, which is not what they got last night. Think about the economy. People care about inflation, and yet last night he pivoted to purchasing automobiles. No, Americans care about basic grocery items and the cost of such, the value of their dollar, and that's why 62% disapprove of his performance on the economy. He touted COVID over and over again, but only 54% of Americans approve. And is that why only 63% of them are actually fully vaccinated? Clearly, his messaging has been botched from the beginning. And 64% think that he's going in the wrong direction. We know this. 70% do not want him to run again. So when he says he's overaccomplished, he's done more than any other president in the past, he's absolutely has rose-colored glasses on that the rest of Americans see through. Last night would have been better served as a town hall with real Americans asking real questions, not these reporters asking.
Even if it had to be digital. I mean, if that were the situation, whatever it would take right now just to get some real Americans in it. It's so interesting what you said, though, about COVID and where we are. Because last hour we did COVID Confusion, our special half hour on the Faulkner Focus. And Dr. Siegel said that. He said, we might be in a completely different place now if he hadn't botched the messaging. And he is responsible, the president, because his administration bears his name on it. These are the people that work for him.